The train slid into Penn Station with a tired metal sigh, and Emily Carter rose from her seat as if her bones had been stiffened by the miles behind her. She had slept in snatches on the overnight bus from Ohio, cheek pressed to a window ghosted with the soft breath of strangers. New York hit her in pieces, the steam rising from grates, the winter grit underfoot, the echo of boots in the cavernous station. She gripped the handle of the worn leather tote Margaret had given her. "Good luck, Em, you don't owe anyone anything," and stepped into the morning that made promises it would never sign. Outside, taxis argued with each other and pedestrians threaded through them like needles.
The wind of the Hudson found her scalp beneath her thrift coat.
She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and turned east, then south, then east again, figuring out that there were a dozen ways to be wrong in a city that didn't slow down to forgive you. She'd memorized the address, Hudson Group, 400 West 57th, the kind of building that taught the sky how to make room. The lobby was a performance of quiet money.
Marble slick ice.
A wall-sized digital canvas streaming a film of gleaming projects, towers in Dubai, glass arcs in Singapore, a magazine cover with the square jaw of a man she had seen on business channels her whole life. The woman at the reception desk took her ID, smiled with an efficiency that didn't touch her eyes, and told Emily to take the elevator to the 48th floor.
Monsieur Blake's floor.
Emily wasn't sure why she asked. She wanted to hear the name aloud. Maybe she wanted to know if it would echo. The woman's smile grew real for a second. "The Lion's Den," she said, and with a flick of a finger, marked the visitor's badge with a white dot. The elevator blinked floors like seconds. 48 dinged with a sound you could only hear if you listened for it. The doors opened on a hush so complete Emily felt suddenly loud, her own heartbeat a percussion in her ears. The reception area was all cool neutrals, sandstone, slate, and glass that held the river in its panes. Beyond, a corridor wide enough for 2 cars opened on an office whose doors were closed and whose presence pressed out even through that thin seam of wood.
Emily Carter.
A woman in a navy dress stood from a small desk to Emily's right, her hair braided into an immaculate knot. "I'm Alina. Mr. Blake will see you in 10 minutes. Please have a seat." "Thank you," Emily said. Her voice did not sound like it belonged to her. She sat on the edge of a leather chair and tried to breathe. She had 2 resumes in her tote, printed on nice paper from a shop that let her borrow their stapler. The bullet points felt modest to the point of embarrassment. She'd finished her associate's degree part-time. She'd run the front desk of a gym where men slammed weights like thunder. She could type, fast. That was what she had. That and a stubborn belief that if she didn't stand up in her life now, the rest of it would be lived sitting down. Her phone buzzed in her pocket.
Margaret.
She let the first call go to voicemail, then answered the second.
"You there?"
Margaret asked, as if she could see through the phone and into that hallway with its capital S silence. "I'm here. You can still walk out. You don't owe them all." "I know."
"You remember what he told you?"
"Yes," Emily said, though she wasn't sure which thing to choose.
"Leave a room you don't like.
Never apologize for wanting more.
Don't mistake power for safety. Trust your gut. If it tightens, listen." Margaret exhaled. "Call me after."
"I will." She was about to slide the phone away when the office door opened. The man who stepped out was the photograph grown dimensional. Jonathan Blake, the hair gone cleanly silver at the temples, the suit that fit as if it had rehearsed, the posture of someone who had learned young that rooms tilt toward certain people. He didn't move so much as alter the air. "Ms. Carter," he said, looking directly at her. Not at her shoes or her hands or her resume packet. At her.
"Come."
Alina gestured, habit more than instruction, and Emily followed him into a room that threw the river at you like a mirror. The desk held 2 neat stacks of paper and a monitor asleep in a screensaver swirl. The shelves along the wall were full of books whose spines pretended they had all been read. A long table stood beneath an abstract painting that refused to resolve. He did not sit behind the desk. Instead, he stopped beside it and indicated a small table with 2 chairs.
"Have a seat, Ms. Carter."
"Thank you, Mr. Blake." She tried to meet him where his voice was, not casual, not formal exactly. Controlled. He took the chair opposite her and took her resume. He read it quickly, or at least turned the pages at a pace that looked like reading. When he looked up, his eyes were lighter than they seemed on television, a gray that could slide into blue. You worked 2 jobs while finishing school, he said. Not a question. I did. Why do you want this one? She could have said what she'd practiced, about challenge and growth and linear progress. Instead, the truth jumped first. Because I can learn anything and I don't break. And because if I'm going to pour myself out anywhere, I want it to fill something that holds. A smile crossed his face and disappeared as if embarrassed to be seen. We require a certain pace here, he said.
À précision.
I'm precise. He set the resume down. We'll see. He angled the laptop toward her and opened a blank document. I'm going to dictate. You'll type.
Verbatim. Nos ponctuations instructions. Your jugement.
Her hands found the keyboard as if it had been made to her measure. He began, Q2 Portfolio Review. Obtain revised pro forma on the Park Slope redevelopment. Factor in interest rate rise scenarios at 25, 50, and 75 BPS. Stress test cash flow coverage given cost overruns due to supply chain volatility. Liaise with counsel on the 79th Street rezoning lawsuit. Allocate contingency funds accordingly. His voice had the cadence of someone used to being listened to. She fell in behind the words, catching the shape of the sentence before he finished it, laying down commas the way a runner finds stride. He didn't speed up to break her or slow down to help her. He just spoke. She just typed. When he paused, she didn't look up. She cleaned 2 words he'd let tangle. She put a colon when it wanted to be there. She hit save instinctively and named the file exactly the way the folder she'd glimpsed on his desktop had been named: date, project, iteration. He stood, walked around the table, and leaned slightly over her shoulder. He did not touch the back of her chair. He did not need to. Scroll, he said. She scrolled.
Back to the 3rd paragraph.
She went back. He was close enough that she could smell a whisper of something: citrus, paper, wool pressed with heat.
You pue à semi-colon here.
It felt like one, she said. Then wished she'd stayed quiet. It did, he said. He straightened.
That's all.
She moved to stand, but he lifted a hand in a gesture that said wait. He walked to his desk, pressed the intercom.
Alina. Yes, Monsieur Blake.
Make an offer to Ms. Carter for the assistant position.
Start that Monday.
A pause.
Understood.
Emily held herself very still, as if any sudden movement might dislodge what had just happened and cause it to scramble backward. He looked at her again, and the room narrowed to that look. You're not the most qualified candidate on paper, he said. But paper rarely answers a phone at 10 p.m. without resentment. The job is not ours. It is absorption. You'll find that out. He glanced at the laptop screen as if it had spoken. You have economy. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said.
We run lean.
We expect much. He checked his watch, though the wall clock was right in front of him with its big benevolent face. Alina will provide the packet.
Read it all.
Especially the parts people usually skim. He was already turning away. Dismissal delivered without cape or flourish. She rose. Ms. Carter, he said, not looking. She stopped. He did look then, and for exactly 3 seconds, she counted without wanting to. He held her in a gaze that did not feel like an assessment or a threat. It felt like someone standing at the lip of a story he had not decided to enter. The seconds ended.
Welcome to Hudson.
In the hallway, Alina slid a folder across the desk. Congratulations, she said in a tone that did not welcome agreement. Read the confidentiality clause twice. Also the availability clause. Do you have a place to stay? For now, Emily said. For now is fine, Alina said. For now becomes always if you let it. On the elevator down, the folder heavy in her hands, Emily watched herself in the mirrored steel, a young woman who looked like an understudy waiting for someone to fall ill. Outside, the cold slapped her and she smiled, because there was relief you could only feel after holding your breath for too long. She crossed the street to a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and laptops, sat at a small round table, and opened the packet. The clauses were as elastic as rumors.
She texted Margaret, I got it. Two bubbles pulsed. Colme.
She did. I knew you would, Margaret said, pride and worry braided so tightly they were indistinguishable. Remember, lions look like marble until they don't. Emily laughed, and it startled her, the sound of it. I'll be careful. You'll be brave, Margaret said.
Careful comme es laté.
That night, Emily found an Airbnb with a window that pretended to be a view. She ate a sandwich, drew a bath, and set the Hudson packet on the nightstand where it looked like homework assigned by a future she hadn't asked for. When she turned off the light, the city hummed behind the wall like a refrigerator. She lay awake and watched shadows lengthen and dissolve, thinking of Jonathan Blake's voice and the way he had said welcome as if it were a key. In the morning, before dawn glazed the rooftops, she dreamed she stood on a high floor looking out at the river as if it were a vein under glass. In the dream, someone stood behind her. She did not turn. Her body knew he was there. The ghost of citrus rose in the air, and the city held its breath with her. Monday arrived with a grey drizzle that slicked the streets and made the city smell like wet iron. Emily had risen before her alarm, her mind already running through the day in loops. She'd chosen her clothes the night before, a charcoal skirt, a pale blouse, and the one pair of heels she owned that didn't wobble. At 7:15 she stepped into the subway, gripping the strap as the train lurched and swayed, carrying her toward the part of Manhattan where glass towers wore the morning like armor. Hudson Group's lobby was warmer than she remembered, but maybe that was her own nervous temperature. She scanned her badge at the turnstile, the white dot from her visitor pass now replaced with an engraved staff. The elevator rose with its quiet inevitability. She could feel the faint static charge of nerves in her fingertips. Alina met her as the doors opened on 48. "You're early," she said, her voice approving but clipped. "Good. Come. I'll show you your station." Emily's desk was tucked just outside the double doors to Jonathan Blake's office, a curved workspace with a high-backed chair and 2 monitors. There was a phone with more buttons than she'd ever seen and a small brass plaque, E. Carter. Beside it, a neat stack of documents, a leather-bound planner, and a pen that felt heavier than any she'd held. "The phone is your lifeline," Alina said. Color-coded lines, red for internal executives, blue for clients, green for legal. "If it rings twice, answer.
If it ring once, let it go.
If it rings and flashes, Jonathan only." Emily nodded, committing it to memory. "You'll get his schedule every morning. He doesn't keep to it. Your job is to make it look like he does. You'll filter his calls, draft correspondence, prepare research packets, and handle whatever he decides is urgent that hour." Questions. Emily hesitated. How urgent is urgent?
Alina's mood tilted in something like a smile.
"You'll know." At 8:02, the doors to Jonathan's office opened. He emerged in a navy suit, tie knotted with surgical precision, hair still faintly damp. "Morning, Ms. Carter," he said, as if they'd been working together for years.
Walk with me.
She grabbed a legal pad and fell into step beside him. He moved fast, long strides toward the conference room at the far end of the corridor. "You'll sit in on Monday briefings," he said. "Take notes. Summarize by noon. Flag anything that requires my immediate attention." The conference room was already occupied by a half-dozen men and women in varying shades of ambition. They straightened when he entered. Emily took a seat along the wall, pen ready. Jonathan stood at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said. His tone was even, but it carried the room effortlessly. Department heads rattled off updates, project timelines, investment returns, a legal dispute in Chicago. Emily wrote quickly, distilling the noise into clean points. She noticed he rarely interrupted, but when he did, it was with a question so precise it changed the air. By 9 o'clock, the meeting was over. Back at her desk, she typed up the summary, her fingers flying. She hesitated over a phrase, unexpected cost increase, and reworded it into something sharper, variance due to unplanned expenditures. It sounded like the kind of language he'd use. At 9:25, her phone flashed red and rang twice. She answered, "Mr. Blake's office." "Get me the updated Midtown rezoning report," came his voice, crisp as paper. "And find the zoning commissioner's latest statement."
You want it on my desk in 20 minutes.
"Yes, sir." She was already pulling up the planning department's database, cross-referencing the commissioner's press briefings. At 9:41, she walked into his office with a stapled packet and a single-page summary on top. He took it without looking up from his screen. "You've got a good sense for hierarchy," he said absently. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't sure he'd heard. The rest of the morning passed in bursts: calls to confirm meetings, a last-minute presentation tweak, a courier delivering contracts from Boston. She learned that coffee for him was black, 2 sugars, no cream, that he disliked speakerphone, that he never let more than 5 minutes pass without answering an important email. She also learned that he had a way of asking for things that made you want to deliver them faster than possible. At 12:15, he appeared at her desk. "Lunch." She blinked. "For me." "For both of us," he said, as if that were obvious. "There's a place 3 blocks down."
Bring your notepad.
The restaurant was a dark-paneled steakhouse that smelled faintly of smoke and history. They were seated immediately, a booth in the back. He ordered without looking at the menu.
2 club soda, 1 César, 1 ribeye medium rare, 1 grillé salmon.
Then turning to her, "Unless you prefer something else." "That's fine," she said. She wasn't sure she could eat much anyway. As they waited, he asked about her background, not in the way an interviewer would, but like someone mapping coordinates. "Your degree was in communications. Why not journalism?" "I wanted to write," she said. "But I didn't want to chase people in grief for a quote." "Practical," he said.
Endure modeur.
"She passed when I was young." He didn't press. Instead, he said, "People think running a company is about vision. It's not. It's about pattern recognition. Spotting the thing no one else has connected yet. That's what I'll need from you, pattern recognition." Their meals arrived. She took a small bite of salmon, tried to match his pace without appearing to. He spoke of an upcoming gala for the Hudson Foundation, the way deals were made more often over wine than in boardrooms, and the importance of remembering names. By 1:10, they were back in the office. The afternoon blurred, coordinating travel for an executive, drafting a press release, fielding a call from a city council member. Each task carried the unspoken weight of being attached to his name. At 5:47, Alina appeared at Emily's desk. "He'll want you to stay late tonight. Don't look surprised. Mondays often run long." Sure enough, at 6:15, he stepped out. "Ms. Carter, conference room B. Bring the file marked Palisades." She found it, thick, tabbed, intimidating, and followed him in. For the next hour, they went over investment breakdowns, her taking notes while he dictated revisions. She noticed he rarely looked at the page, as if the numbers were stored somewhere behind his eyes. At 7:30, he closed the folder. "That's enough for tonight." She gathered her papers, but he didn't stand. "You kept pace today," he said. "That's not common for a first day." "I wanted to be ready." "You were," he said simply. "Then, get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder." On the street, the drizzle had turned to rain. She walked to the subway with the rhythm of his voice still in her head. In her small Airbnb room, she hung her damp coat, made tea, and opened her planner. She wrote, in small deliberate letters, "Pattern recognition." She underlined it twice. By the 3rd week, Emily could anticipate Jonathan's requests before he made them. The rhythm of his days had settled into her like a second pulse: morning briefings, rapid-fire calls, documents arriving and leaving his desk in cycles as predictable as tides. She had learned to read his silences as clearly as his words. The slight pause before he set down a pen meant he was about to ask for a decision. The way his jaw flexed before a meeting meant he had already dismissed someone's argument in his head. She had also learned that his schedule was more of a suggestion than a boundary. Sometimes, at 8:45 p.m., her phone would flash with the green line, Jonathan's direct call, and she would hear, "Come in for a moment." It might be to review a proposal, it might be to dictate a letter to a senator, it might be to ask her to arrange a car for the next morning's dawn flight. She never knew which it would be, and she never said no. One Tuesday evening, she was about to shut down her computer when the green light flashed. "Ms. Carter," his voice came, "do you have plans?" "Not tonight," she said. "Good. Bring your coat." He was already in the lobby when she arrived, coat over one arm, a black umbrella in the other. "I need to eat," he said. "And I can't think in an empty room." They walked 2 blocks to a narrow restaurant she hadn't noticed before, its windows fogged against the November chill. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary and seared meat. They were seated in a corner booth, the kind that made the rest of the world recede. He ordered for both of them without consulting a menu: lamb for him, halibut for her, a bottle of white wine. Over dinner, the conversation drifted away from business. He asked about the town in Ohio where she grew up, the diner where she worked weekends in high school, the college classes she'd liked best. In return, he told her about his first years in New York, sleeping in a studio apartment with a leaky radiator, working as a junior analyst for a firm that no longer existed. "You can't imagine me doing someone else's grunt work, can you?" he asked. "I can imagine you doing whatever it takes," she said. That drew a faint smile. "I like that answer." The wine softened the edges of the evening. She found herself laughing at his stories. Once, a deal meeting in Hong Kong had been interrupted by a typhoon, and they'd closed the contract by candlelight in a hotel basement. She realized, somewhere between the entree and dessert, that she was no longer thinking of him as Mr. Blake in her head. When the check came, he didn't look at it, just signed with a quick stroke.
Outside, ramistait down, catching the streetlight.
He held the umbrella over both of them as they walked back to the building. In the lobby, she started toward the elevator bank for her desk to collect her things, but he caught her wrist lightly. "Come up," he said. His penthouse was on the top floor, above even his office. The elevator opened directly into a space of glass and steel softened by warm light.
Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Hudson like a moving painting.
There were bookshelves along one wall, a low sectional facing a fireplace, and a grand piano in the corner. The air smelled faintly of cedar. "Drink?" he asked, moving toward a sideboard stocked with crystal bottles. She hesitated, then said, "Just water." He poured a glass and handed it to her, then sat across from her in one of the armchairs.
"Do you know why he read you?"
"Because I can type fast," she said lightly. "That's part of it. But there are plenty of people who can type fast. You listen. You see. That's rarer." She felt the heat in her cheeks and looked down at the glass in her hands. "I like the work." "You like the proximity," he said, not unkindly. Her head came up.
"I like being good at what I do."
"That too." The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but waited.
Outside, the river glinted under the city lights.
He leaned back, studying her the way he studied a market trend, measuring risk, potential, timing. "Tell me," he said finally, "are you ambitious, Emily?" She thought of Margaret's voice in her ear, "Don't mistake power for safety." "Yes," she said. "Good." He stood, signaling the conversation's end as much as its beginning. "Get some rest.
We start early tomorrow."
She left the penthouse with her pulse thudding in her throat, unsure whether a line had been crossed or simply approached. On the subway ride home, she stared at her reflection in the dark window and wondered if she would recognize herself a year from now. In the weeks that followed, the boundaries blurred further. A late meeting would turn into a shared dinner. A briefing would end with him asking her opinion, not on logistics, but on strategy. Once, when a client sent an obscenely expensive bottle of wine as thanks, he had opened it in his office at 8 p.m. and poured her a glass, saying, "Some things aren't meant to be saved." By December, she was staying later and later, sometimes until midnight. She told herself it was because she was indispensable, because the work demanded it. But sometimes she caught his gaze lingering a moment too long, and the reason felt less certain. One Friday night, snow began to fall as she was finishing a report. Jonathan appeared at her desk, coat in hand. "Come see something," he said. They rode the elevator to the rooftop terrace, a private space she hadn't known existed. The city stretched out in every direction, muffled under the falling snow. The Hudson was a dark ribbon below. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "It's quieter up here," he said. She nodded, her breath clouding in the cold.
"It's beautiful."
He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Some views are better shared." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt toward him. She felt the weight of the snow on her hair, the hum of the city far below, the steady presence of him beside her. Then he stepped back, breaking whatever spell had been forming. "Go home, Miss Carter," he said softly. "We've got a long week ahead." She did as he said, but the quiet of the rooftop followed her into her dreams. The first sign came in January, during a week of relentless deadlines. Emily had been blaming her fatigue on late nights and too much coffee, the mild nausea on bad takeout. But one morning, standing in the mirrored elevator on her way up to the 48th floor, she noticed the pallor in her cheeks, the faint hollowing under her eyes. Something in her reflection looked different. By Friday, She couldn't ignore it anymore. On her lunch break, she ducked into a pharmacy 2 blocks from the office. The clerk barely glanced at her as she slid the small box across the counter. Back in her apartment that night, she set the test on the bathroom sink and stared at the instructions until the words blurred. 2 lines. She sat on the edge of the tub, her breath shallow. It felt impossible, and yet her body seemed to understand before her mind did. She pressed a hand to her stomach, as if she might feel something there already. The next morning, she was in the office before sunrise. Jonathan arrived at 8, as usual, and she told herself she wouldn't say anything yet, not until she knew how. But when he called her in to review a presentation, she found herself staring at him, wondering what it would do to him, to them, to the fragile balance they had been keeping. For a week, she kept the secret. She worked as if nothing had changed, though her mind was a storm. At night, she lay awake thinking of Margaret's small house in Ohio, of the way her mother's face had blurred in memory over the years, of the life she might now be responsible for shaping. Then, without warning, the story broke. It was a Thursday afternoon. She was drafting an email when Alina appeared at her desk, face pale. "You need to see this," she said, sliding her phone across the desk. On the screen was a grainy photograph taken through the window of a restaurant, Emily and Jonathan, seated in a corner booth, leaning toward each other. The headline beneath it read, "The Lion's New Protégé," or something more. Her stomach dropped. "Where?" "It's on 3 sites already," Alina said. "By tomorrow, it'll be everywhere." Jonathan's door opened. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Inside." She followed him in, closing the door behind her. He held a printout of the article, the ink still smelling faintly of toner. "Do you know who took this?" "No," she said. "I didn't even." "It doesn't matter," he cut in. He set the paper down, leaning on the desk. "This will feed speculation. They'll dig. They always dig." Her mouth was dry. "What do we do?" "What we always do," he said. "Control the narrative." That night, she stayed late drafting statements, carefully worded denials that said nothing and everything at once. By morning, the gossip columns were buzzing. Anonymous sources claimed to have seen them dining together often, leaving the office after hours. A podcast hinted that she'd been promoted unusually quickly. By the end of the week, the Hudson Group board had called an emergency meeting. Jonathan went in alone. When he emerged, his face was unreadable. "They want you out," he said in his office, the door shut tight. "They think you're a liability." Her chest tightened. "And you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I told them you're not going anywhere. And I told them why." It took her a beat to understand. "You told them?" "That you're carrying my child," he said. Her breath caught. "You what?" "It was going to come out eventually. This way it's on our terms." "Our terms?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "You just announced it to a room full of people." "To protect you," he said, his tone even. "If you're mine, they can't touch you." She felt heat rise in her chest, not the warmth of safety, but the flush of being claimed.
You don't need to be your to survivre.
"Maybe not," he said. "But this makes it easier." By Monday, her role had shifted. She was no longer just the efficient assistant who could read his silences. She was a figure in a whispered narrative, the young woman carrying the air of Hudson Group. Some of her colleagues avoided her, others looked at her with a mixture of envy and curiosity. No one spoke of the article directly, but she could feel it humming beneath every interaction. Jonathan moved her into a company-owned apartment on the Upper West Side. "Security will be tighter there," he said. The place was sleek and impersonal, white walls, chrome fixtures, a view of the river.
A private elevator connected it to the underground garage.
There was a doorman who never asked questions. Alina visited once, bringing files for Emily to review from home. "It's like they've put you in a glass box," she said, setting the folders on the kitchen counter. Emily glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows.
"Feel like it."
She worked from the apartment for the next week, Jonathan visiting in the evenings to go over documents. Sometimes they ate dinner together at the long dining table, sometimes he left quickly, taking calls as he walked out the door. The lines between their personal and professional lives blurred until she could no longer tell where one ended. One night, after he'd left, she wandered through the apartment, restless. In the second bedroom, intended she supposed for a child, she found a cardboard box in the back of the closet. Inside were a few personal items, framed photographs, old press clippings, and at the bottom, a leather-bound book. It was a journal. The first page bore a name in neat script, Hannah Blake. The entries were dated more than 20 years ago. As she skimmed, she saw glimpses of another life, college classes, trips abroad, a complicated relationship with someone referred to only as him. And then near the middle, a line that made her freeze. He says we can't tell anyone yet. That it would ruin everything. Emily closed the book slowly, her mind racing. She had never heard Jonathan mention a Hannah Blake. But the name, the secrecy, it gnawed at her. In bed that night, she lay awake, listening to the hum of the city outside the windows. The headlines, the apartment, the journal, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle whose picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see. The next morning, Emily couldn't focus on the contracts spread across her kitchen counter. The name Hannah Blake sat in the corner of her mind like an unopened letter. She told herself it was none of her business, that Jonathan's past was his to reveal, or not, but the journal had an insistence to it. It wasn't just a relic, it felt like a whisper meant for her ears. She waited until nightfall to open it again. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. Early entries painted a picture of someone intelligent and restless, moving through Manhattan's social scene with equal parts grace and skepticism. Then, slowly, the tone shifted. Hannah wrote of someone she loved, a man older than her, powerful, private. She described stolen weekends in the Hamptons, late-night calls that left her both elated and hollow. He says the timing isn't right. That people wouldn't understand. But sometimes I think he's protecting himself more than he's protecting me. The later pages were tinged with unease. References to arguments, to whispered conversations cut short when others entered the room. One entry made Emily's stomach knot. I think I might be pregnant. I haven't told him yet. I don't know if I want to. Emily closed the journal, her heart pounding. She told herself it could be anyone. Hannah Blake might have been involved with some other man in New York's elite, someone whose story had nothing to do with hers. And yet, the proximity of the name, the similarities in the situation, it was hard not to draw lines between them. The following day, she went into the office for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Eyes followed her when she stepped off the elevator. She kept her gaze forward, moving to her desk outside Jonathan's door. He arrived shortly after, nodding to her as though the world hadn't been speculating about them for days. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't stand it anymore. When a break in his calls came, she knocked and stepped into his office. I found something in the apartment, she said. He didn't look up from his laptop.
What sort of something?
A journal, she said. It belonged to someone named Hannah Blake. That made him pause. He sat back in his chair, studying her. Where exactly did you find it? In the closet of the second bedroom. In a box. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, she was my daughter.
Emily blinked. Your docteur.
She died a long time ago, he said, his voice even. The apartment you're in was once hers. I suppose some of her things remained. Emily felt a chill crawl along her arms. She was about my age? She would be older now, he said, ignoring the question's edge. She had a gift for words, but she was impulsive, trusting in ways the world doesn't reward. Emily hesitated. The man in her journal. Not a conversation I care to have, he cut in, his tone sharpening.
Leave the past where it belongs.
She bit back the retort on her tongue. Of course. That night, alone in the apartment, she thought about the way he'd dismissed the subject. There was a precision to his avoidance, the same precision he brought to deal-making. He hadn't denied that the man Hannah wrote about was him. He'd simply refused to confirm it. The next week, Emily found herself drawn to the journal again. Near the end, Hannah's writing became erratic, ink blots, crossed-out lines. In the final dated entry, she wrote, If I tell him, everything changes.
If he don't, I'm alone in this.
The pages after that were blank. The weight of those words sat on Emily as she moved through her days. The boardroom conversations, the tightly choreographed public appearances with Jonathan, the way he carried himself as if nothing could touch him, all of it felt layered over a story she didn't fully know. One afternoon, she took the risk of asking Alina about Hannah. They were reviewing travel arrangements in the conference room when Emily said, "Did you know her?" Alina's eyes flicked up sharply. "Why?" "I found some of her things," Emily said carefully. "I was curious."
Alina hésita-t-elle.
"I started here after she wasn't around anymore. People said she was bright. That she had a way of making you believe you were the only person in the room. But that she was complicated."
Complicatedao.
Alina gathered the travel papers into a neat stack. Around here, complicated usually means you knew too much about the wrong person. Emily left it at that, but her thoughts churned. She remembered the line in Hannah's journal, "I think I might be pregnant." She remembered Jonathan's face when she told him about her own pregnancy, the way he'd claimed her to protect her position. The parallels were hard to ignore. That weekend, Jonathan invited her to a private dinner at his penthouse. The view of the Hudson was black glass under a low sky. Over grilled sea bass and a crisp white wine, he was unusually quiet. Finally, he said, "You've been distracted." "I've had a lot on my mind," she admitted. "Don't confuse the noise with the work," he said. "The work is the only thing that stays." She met his gaze.
And the reste. The reste fade.
She wanted to tell him she'd read every word of Hannah's journal, that she saw the ways their stories might be tangled. She wanted to ask if he thought history had a way of repeating itself, if he feared it. But instead, she nodded and let the silence stretch between them. When she left that night, the journal was still in her apartment, hidden in the drawer of the nightstand. She wasn't sure if she was protecting it from him, or herself. The first hint came in the form of a phone call from Ohio. Margaret's voice was taut, the way it got when she was choosing each word. "Emily, I need you to come home for a few days." Emily was in the middle of drafting a speech for Jonathan's upcoming gala. "Is something wrong?" "There are things I should have told you a long time ago," Margaret said. "Things I can't explain over the phone." It was enough to make Emily book a ticket that afternoon. She told Jonathan she needed personal time. He simply nodded and told her to take the company car to the airport. "Don't be gone too long," he said. The winter sky over Ohio was a dull, pewter gray when she arrived. Margaret met her at the station, her arms warm but her eyes restless. They drove in silence back to the small clapboard house where Emily had grown up. Inside, Margaret poured tea and sat at the kitchen table. She didn't look at Emily at first. "Your mother," she began, "wasn't the woman you think she was." Emily frowned. "I know she was young when she had me." "She was 22, Margaret said. "Her name wasn't Carter then. It was Blake." The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. "Blake," Emily repeated. Margaret met her eyes finally. "Your mother's name was Hannah Blake." For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. She thought of the journal in her nightstand in New York, the looping handwriting, the entries about a powerful man. "Hannah," she said, her voice barely audible.
Jonathan est docteur.
Margaret nodded. "He's your grandfather." Emily felt the world tilt, slow and dizzying. "That's not possible."
Et knew me. Et il read me.
"I think he knew exactly who you were," Margaret said quietly. "When Hannah found out she was pregnant, things got bad. She left New York and came here. She told me she'd never go back. When you were 4, she died in that car accident."
I promise d'heure I dirais you.
"I also promised I wouldn't tell you unless I had to." "Why now?" Emily asked, her voice sharp. "Because you're in his orbit," Margaret said. "And I can see it's not just business." Emily stood, pacing the small kitchen. She felt hot and cold all at once. He never said a word. Would you have believed him? Margaret asked. On the flight back to New York, Emily replayed every moment she'd shared with Jonathan, the long dinners, the rooftop in the snow, the way he had claimed her pregnancy as if it were a shield. If Margaret was right, he'd done all of it knowing she was his granddaughter. The thought made her stomach twist. When she walked into his office 2 days later, she didn't bother knocking. He was at his desk, reading something on his screen. He looked up, surprised at her expression. "We need to talk," she said. He closed the laptop. "All right." "My mother was Hannah Blake," she said. "That makes you." "I know who it makes me," he said, cutting her off. "You knew?" she demanded. I suspected when you came in for the interview, he said evenly.
The resemblance.
Your middle name.
And you said nothing.
What would you have done if I had? He asked.
Walked away?
Slammed the door on the opportunity. Her hands curled into fists. You let me think. She couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of the unspoken made her feel sick. I didn't let you think anything, he said. I kept you close to protect you.
Protect me. Her voice cracked.
From what? From the world I built, he said, leaning back in his chair. From the people who would use you to get to me. You think I don't know what they're capable of. You've been one of them your whole life, she shot back. His jaw tightened. And I've survived because I understand the rules.
Emily shook her head.
You don't get to make this noble. You took away my choice. You should have told me the truth from the beginning. For the first time, he looked tired. And if I had, you'd be gone. And I'd never see you again. Maybe that's what should have happened, she said. Silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding. Finally, she turned toward the door. I'm leaving, she said. Where? He asked.
Somewhere you're not.
He didn't try to stop her. 2 weeks later, Emily was in Maine, renting a small weathered cottage in a town that smelled of salt and pine. The ocean was just beyond her porch, its steady rhythm a counterpoint to the chaos she'd left behind. She found work helping at a local community center, teaching basic computer skills to kids after school. It was nothing like Hudson Group, and that was exactly what she needed. Her pregnancy began to show. The townspeople, kind but curious, asked gentle questions she deflected. She met Daniel Brooks, who ran the local pharmacy and doubled as the town's unofficial medic. He was easy to talk to, with the kind of calm that made her feel steady just by being near him. One afternoon, as they were unpacking donated books for the community center, Daniel glanced at her. You're good with them, he said, nodding toward the kids in the next room. I like that they're not trying to sell me anything, she said. He smiled. Maine's good for that. Sometimes though, when she walked along the shore at dusk, she caught herself thinking of New York, the rush of the elevator to the 48th floor, the view from the rooftop, the weight of Jonathan's gaze. The betrayal still burned, but beneath it was something harder to name. By the time her daughter was born, a small perfect girl she named Lily, Emily had built a quiet life. She sent Margaret photos every week. She didn't call Jonathan. But she knew it was only a matter of time before he found her. The first months in Maine unfolded like pages from a slower book. Mornings began with the cry of gulls and the scent of coffee drifting from the diner across the street. Emily would bundle Lily into a stroller and walk the weathered boardwalk, the Atlantic stretching out like an unbroken thought. The ocean was constant here, calm some days, restless others, but it was never indifferent. She liked that. The cottage she rented was small but sturdy, its paint peeling in places, its windows catching the morning light. She furnished it with second-hand finds, a faded sofa, a chipped oak table, a crib Daniel had helped her sand and repaint. The rhythm of life settled into something almost tender. She worked part-time at the community center, taught Lily to grip her tiny fingers around rattles, learned which local shops sold the freshest bread. Daniel became part of her days without either of them deciding it. He would stop by after his shift at the pharmacy, bringing cough syrup for one of the center's kids or a loaf of his grandmother's molasses bread. He never asked too much about her past. She never offered more than she was ready to share. One breezy April afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching Lily sleep in her bassinet, Daniel said, "You seem lighter lately." Emily glanced at him. Lighter. Like you're not bracing for something all the time. She smiled faintly. That's the thing about the ocean. It's too big for your troubles to fill it. He chuckled. Poetic. But at night, when the wind rattled the cottage windows, she still thought of New York. She thought of the last time she'd seen Jonathan, the way his voice had sounded when he said, "And I'd never see you again." She had meant to make that true. Then, in late May, he found her. It was a Thursday. The community center was holding its weekly story hour. Emily was sitting cross-legged on the rug, Lily in her lap, a semicircle of kids around her. She was halfway through Goodnight Moon when the door opened. A figure stepped inside, tall enough to draw every child's gaze upward.
Jonathan.
He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a gray sweater, but his presence was the same as always, immediate, inescapable. For a moment, Emily thought she might be imagining him, conjured out of memory. Then he met her eyes. "I'll finish the story," Daniel said quietly, appearing at her shoulder. Emily handed him the book and rose, her heart a drumbeat in her ears. She stepped into the hallway, Jonathan following. "How did you?" she began. "You didn't make it difficult," he said. "Margaret told me you were safe. I wanted to see for myself." She crossed her arms. "You saw. Now you can leave." He shook his head. "Not yet." They stood in the narrow hallway, the scent of crayons and floor polish between them. "Why are you here?" she asked. "To give you something." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather-bound book. She recognized it instantly, the same make and size as Hannah's journal. This was hers too. The second one. She didn't take it. "Why bring it now?" "Because there are things in it you should know," he said. Things she wanted to say but never did. Emily hesitated, then took the book. It was heavier than it looked. Jonathan's gaze shifted toward the classroom where Lily was beginning to fuss. "She's beautiful," he said softly. Emily's grip tightened on the journal. "She's not your responsibility." "She's my great-granddaughter," he said. "That means something to me, whether you like it or not." "You had 23 years to care about me," she said. "You waited until it was convenient." "I waited until it was safe," he countered. She almost looked. "Safe? Being near you is the opposite of that." For the first time, something like regret flickered across his face. "You can hate me for what I've done, or not done, but don't make her grow up thinking her blood is poison." Emilie briscoqued. "You don't get to tell me how to raise my doctor." "I'm not," he said. "I'm asking." The sound of children's laughter spilled into the hallway as story hour ended. Jonathan stepped back, as if the noise pushed him. "Read the journal," he said. "Then decide." He left before she could answer. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table and opened the second journal. Hannah's handwriting was shakier here, the lines uneven. These entries were from her last year, months Emily had been too young to remember. Hannah wrote about life in Ohio, about how she missed the city but couldn't bear to go back. She wrote about Margaret's kindness, her own fear of repeating old mistakes. In one entry, Hannah addressed someone directly. "If you ever read this, know that I loved you enough to walk away from everything else. Even from him. Especially from him." Emily's throat tightened. She turned the page. "He asked me to come back once. Said he'd make it right. I told him the only way to make it right was to let me go. He didn't understand. Maybe he never will." Emily closed the journal slowly. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm against the shore. She wondered if Jonathan had read these words before giving the book to her. She wondered if they had hurt him. For the next week, she didn't call him. She didn't know if she ever would. But the journal stayed on the table, as if waiting. One evening, Daniel stopped by. He noticed it immediately. "More of the story?" Emily nodded. "More than I was ready for." He didn't press. Instead, he held Lily while Emily made tea, the sound of the ocean through the open window filling the spaces between them. But she knew the calm wouldn't last. Jonathan Blake never entered a life to leave it quietly. It was early June when Jonathan returned. The day was bright, the ocean restless, the air thick with the scent of salt and wild roses. Emily had just put Lily down for her afternoon nap when a knock came at the cottage door. She opened it to find him standing there, not in the tailored armor of Manhattan but in a plain button-down and khakis. Still, he carried the same weight, as if the air arranged itself around him. "May I come in?" he asked. Emily hesitated, then stepped aside. He glanced toward the bassinet in the corner, where Lily slept, her chest rising and falling in tiny, even breaths. "She's bigger," he said softly. "That happens when you're around babies," Emily replied. "They grow." He gave a faint smile but didn't push further. Instead, he gestured toward the table. "Did you read it?" "Yes." She crossed her arms. "And I'm still deciding what to do with it." "What to do with it?" he echoed. "With you," she said. "With the idea of you in her life." Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to tell you what I think Hannah would have wanted. Emily bristled. You don't get to speak for her. I knew her, he said.
Better than most.
You knew parts of her, Emily corrected. And you hurt those parts. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice stayed level. Maybe. But I also gave her what I could. And I'm trying to give you something now. She waited. I don't expect to be her grandfather, he said, nodding toward Lily. I don't expect holidays or bedtime stories. But I'd like her to know I exist. That I'm not just a shadow in a family story. Emily looked down at the table, at the faint ring from her tea mug. And if I say no? Then I leave it there, he said. But she'll grow up wondering. And you'll have to decide what to tell her. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of the ocean filling the space between them. Finally, Emily said, if you see her, it's once. No photographs, no gifts, no promises. Jonathan nodded. Once is enough for now.
Emily stood, crossing tous bassinets.
She lifted Lily, who blinked up at her, confused but calm. Jonathan rose as she brought the baby closer. For a moment, he didn't move, as if unsure whether to take her. Then Emily shifted Lily into his arms. He held her awkwardly at first, then more securely as Lily's small fist caught the fabric of his shirt. His eyes softened, the lines around them deepening. Hello, he said quietly.
Jonathan.
Emily watched, her arms folded, every instinct alert. He didn't try to call himself anything else, no grandfather, no family.
Just Jonathan.
Lily yawned, her eyes half closing. Jonathan adjusted his hold, swaying slightly. She has Hannah's mouth, he murmured. Emily felt a pang she didn't expect. She has mine. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Both can be true. After a few minutes, Lily began to fuss, and Emily took her back. Jonathan didn't resist. Thank you, he said, as if she'd given him something rare and breakable. Don't make me regret it, she replied. He stood, glancing around the small room one last time. I'll be in town for a few days. If you change your mind about talking, you know where to find me. When he left, the cottage felt both lighter and heavier. Emily put Lily back down and sat at the table, the second journal still lying there. She opened it to one of the final entries, dated just weeks before Hannah's death. I hope my child finds someone to tell her the truth. Even if it's not me. Emily closed the book and pressed her palms to her eyes. That night, she walked the shoreline after sunset, Lily in a sling against her chest.
The tide was high, the wave curling in silver under the moon.
She thought about Jonathan's face as he'd held Lily, about the steadiness in his voice when he'd said, once is enough. She wondered if he meant it, or if it was just the opening move in a longer game. When she returned to the cottage, the phone was ringing. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her gut made her answer. It was Jonathan. I forgot to tell you something, he said. What?
I'm not the only one who knew about you.
There are people in my world who would use that. If anyone comes asking questions, about me, about her, don't answer. Emily's grip tightened on the phone. Is that a warning? It's advice, he said. You can hate me all you want, but don't underestimate the circles I move in. She didn't respond. After a moment he said, Good night, Emily, and the line went dead. Emily stood there, listening to the ocean through the open window, her heart pounding. It wasn't just about family anymore. There were other currents at work, and she wasn't sure she knew how deep they ran. The news came on an overcast morning in late August. Emily was feeding Lily oatmeal at the kitchen table when the phone rang. She almost ignored it. Telemarketers rarely called this early, but the number was from New York.
Emily Carter.
The voice was male, clipped, professional. Yes. This is Thomas Gray, legal counsel for Hudson Group. I'm afraid I have difficult news. Jonathan Blake passed away late last night. Her spoon paused halfway to Lily's mouth. Passed away.
Heart attack.
It was sudden. Emily swallowed hard. She hadn't spoken to Jonathan in nearly 2 months, but the last image she had of him, holding Lily, eyes soft, came rushing back. I see. There's another matter, Thomas Gray continued.
Monsieur Blake left a will.
You and your daughter are named in it. We'll need you in New York for the reading. Emily stared at the peeling paint on the kitchen wall. What exactly did he leave?
I can't disclose the details over the phone.
But I will say this, it changes certain expectations at Hudson Group. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by. She told him everything, her voice flat. I don't know if I want to go. You should, Daniel said gently. Even if it's just for closure. Closure. The word felt too neat for the knot inside her. 2 days later, she was in Manhattan again. The city's noise hit her like a wave, taxis blaring, sidewalks bristling with urgency. The law firm's offices were on the 50th floor of a tower in Midtown, the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of leather and paper contracts. The conference room was large, the table polished to a mirror shine. Around it sat a handful of people, 2 board members she recognized from Hudson, a few unfamiliar faces, and Alina, who looked thinner than Emily remembered. Thomas Gray, silver-haired and meticulous in a dark suit, began the reading. Most of it was predictable, charitable donations, bequests to long-time employees. Then his voice shifted. To my great-granddaughter Lily Carter, I leave 30% of my personal estate, to be held in trust until her 21st birthday. To her mother, Emily Carter, I leave controlling interest in Hudson Group. A murmur rippled around the table.
Emily sat frozen. Controlling interest.
Thomas Gray looked at her over his glasses. 51% of voting shares. The room's air thickened. One of the board members leaned forward. This is highly irregular. It is the will, Thomas Gray said. Legally binding. Emily found her voice. Why would he? Perhaps, Alina said quietly, he trusted you more than you think. The rest of the meeting blurred. Paperwork was slid toward her, terms explained, obligations outlined. She signed nothing. She only listened, her mind still reeling. Afterward, in the hallway, Alina caught her arm. They're not happy, she said. The board. They'll try to push you out. I don't even want the company, Emily said. That won't matter, Alina replied. You have something they want. Emily returned to Maine that night, the city's pull still in her chest. She sat at the kitchen table long after Lily was asleep, Jonathan's second journal beside her. She opened it to the very last page. It was blank, except for one sentence scrawled in his hand. The only way to protect something is to give it power. She traced the words with her finger, wondering if this had been meant for her. Or for Lily. Or for someone Jonathan had never gotten the chance to face. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail.
No return address.
Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words.
You don't know what you've inherited. And you're not the only one who wants it.
Emily read it twice, then folded it carefully. The ocean outside was calm, but she could feel the storm gathering. The letter stayed on Emily's table for 3 days before she told anyone. Daniel noticed her distraction, the way she kept glancing at it as if it might rearrange itself into something less threatening. Who sent it? He asked one evening as they stood by the sink, washing dishes. I don't know, she said. But they know about the will. And they're warning me, or threatening me. Daniel dried his hands. What are you going to do? Emily looked toward the ocean through the kitchen window. I'm going to decide whether I keep it or give it up. The decision haunted her in quiet moments, feeding Lily, folding laundry, walking the boardwalk. The Hudson Group wasn't just a company, it was a labyrinth of influence, alliances, and grudges. Jonathan had built it to withstand storms, but now the control of it rested with her. A woman who had run from that world. A week later, she got another call from Thomas Gray. The board wants to meet with you, he said. They'll offer you a buyout, substantial enough to set you and your daughter for life. Emily didn't answer right away. And if I say no? They'll fight you, he said plainly. And they have more experience in that arena. That night, she took the second journal from its place in the drawer. She flipped through pages until she found one where Hannah had written about leaving New York.
The hardest part of walking away isn't what you lose. It's knowing what you'll never control again.
But sometimes that's the only way to keep your hands clean. Emily closed the book, her chest tight. She thought about Jonathan's note, the only way to protect something is to give it power. Maybe he'd been wrong. Or maybe he'd underestimated the cost of holding it. The meeting with the board was set for the following Monday. Emily took the train to New York, leaving Lily with Margaret for the weekend. The city felt the same, but she didn't. She walked into the Hudson Group's tower not as an assistant but as its majority shareholder. The receptionists straightened. Security nodded her through without question. In the boardroom, a dozen eyes followed her to the head of the table. The chair was Jonathan's once. It felt strange under her hands. The chairman cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, we're prepared to offer you $120 million for your shares. You'd retain a ceremonial title if you wish, but operational control would return to the board." Emily looked at each face. "And if I keep them?" "You'll find the position untenable," the chairman said. "You'd be isolated, voted down, possibly sued." She thought about the life she had in Maine, the ocean, Lily's laughter, Daniel's steady presence. She thought about the glass walls of this building, the way Jonathan's gaze had once made her feel both seen and claimed. She thought about Hannah, writing in her journal about the cost of power. "I'll sign," she said finally. Relief flickered across several faces. The contracts were ready. She read each page carefully, signed where needed, and slid the papers back. When it was done, she stood. "One condition," she said.
The Hudson Foundation stay.
"And 20% of its annual grants go to rural community programs." The chairman hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." She left the building without looking back. Back in Maine, the air tasted different, cleaner, as if the city's residue had finally lifted. She told Daniel what she'd done. "You could have kept it," he said. "I could have," she agreed. "But then it would have kept me." Summer edged into autumn. Lily began to crawl, her laughter filling the small rooms of the cottage. Emily taught more classes at the community center, expanding them to include adults learning basic skills. The rhythm of the sea became her clock again.
One crisp October morning, a new family moved into the house 2 doors down.
Among them was a little girl with dark hair and a shy smile. She joined Emily's class a week later. On the roll sheet, Emily saw her name, Hannah. She froze for a moment, then looked over at the girl, who was carefully coloring inside the lines of a paper maple leaf. Emily smiled. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emily took the second journal to the porch. She opened to the first page, then closed it again without reading.
She whispered into the wind, "I won't call you a monster."
"But I won't call you a hero either." The ocean answered with a long low sigh against the shore.
In the morning, Emily and Lily walked the beach.
The tide was low, the sand wet and firm beneath their feet. Emily left a trail of prints beside her daughter's smaller ones, the two paths weaving together. Behind them, the waves rolled in, erasing each step until the beach was smooth again. She didn't need to look back to know they were gone.